The wind arrives before the rain, slow at first, almost polite, like a warning no one wants to hear. Along the eastern edge of the Pacific, satellites watch a mass of clouds tighten and spin, growing darker by the hour. Inside a glass-walled research facility far from the coast, a group of Chinese scientists stand around a massive simulation table, coffee cups warm in their hands, voices calm, confident, almost bored. They have run this scenario dozens of times. Typhoons are numbers to them. Pressure, wind speed, rainfall density. Variables that can be adjusted, paused, rewound. When the name of the Philippines appears on the projected map, someone exhales through a smile that is not kind. Someone else chuckles. It is not hatred. It is worse. It is certainty. They speak softly, joking about chaos, about poor infrastructure, about responders who arrive late and leave early. They say the word, emotional, as if it explains everything. They do not know yet that this storm will refuse to stay inside the screen. Thousands of kilometers away, the sea around the Philippine Islands begins to change color. Fishermen notice it first. The water darkens, thickens as if something heavy is pressing down from the sky. Radios crackle with warnings that sound too familiar to be frightening anymore. Families move pots, lift furniture, tape windows, repeat motions learned from childhood. In a coastal barangay where the road turns to mud when it rains too hard, a Filipino disaster responder named Mateo tightens the strap on his vest and listens to the wind. He has been doing this job for 12 years. He has buried friends. He has pulled children from roofs. He knows the sound of a storm that will kill if it is allowed to. He looks at the sky and feels something different this time. Not fear. Wait. As if the air itself is holding its breath. The simulation room is cool and dry. The storm on the screen grows rapidly, faster than expected. A junior analyst points at a pressure drop that does not match the model. Someone waves it away. The Philippines sits in the center of the projected impact zone, colored deep red. They won't evacuate in time, someone says casually. They never do. Another adds that local responders will be overwhelmed, that coordination will collapse, that emotional decision-making always ruins efficiency. Laughter again, brief, controlled. The lead researcher allows it. He has published papers on disaster response optimization. He believes in discipline, hierarchy, perfect planning. He believes simulations reveal truth. Outside the building, the sky is clear. Inside, confidence hardens into arrogance. Back on the coast, Mateo's radio comes alive. The storm has accelerated. Landfall moved up by 8 hours. Evacuation orders expand outward, swallowing villages that were not supposed to be hit this hard. Mateo feels the familiar pull in his chest, the knowledge that there will never be enough time. He walks past a line of volunteers loading rice sacks and medical kits into trucks older than some of the men driving them. He sees fear in their eyes and something stronger layered over it. Commitment. No one is paid enough for this. Some are not paid at all. They show up anyway. A young woman named Lila, barely 20, hands him a clipboard with shaking hands. She lost her father to a flood when she was 12. She does not say it. She does not have to. Mateo nods and takes the list. The storm's outer bands hit before dawn. Rain slams into roofs like thrown gravel. Trees bend then snap. Power lines spark and die. In the simulation room, alarms chime softly as data updates. Wind speeds spike past predicted limits. Rainfall rates double. The room grows quiet. Someone clears their throat. That's unusual, the junior analyst says. The lead researcher frowns. He adjusts parameters, reruns calculations. The model resists. The storm is feeding off warm water longer than expected, refusing to weaken. On the screen, evacuation timelines begin to overlap with impact zones. A red warning flashes. Late response equals catastrophic loss. The joke from earlier hangs in the air, sour and heavy. In the Philippines, night turns into something else entirely. Wind howls like a living thing. Mateo and his team move through waist-deep water, knocking on doors that should already be empty. They shout names into the storm. Some people refuse to leave. Some cannot. An elderly man clings to a doorframe, sobbing that he was born in this house and will die in it. Mateo does not argue. He lifts the man onto his back and wades forward, muscles screaming. Somewhere nearby, a child cries until the wind steals the sound. Lila slips, falls, stands again without a word. When a roof tears free and disappears into the darkness, no one flinches. Fear would waste time. The simulation now shows infrastructure failure cascading across the map. Roads vanish. Communication nodes blink out one by one. The lead researcher's jaw tightens. This is not how the scenario was supposed to go. He orders a pause. The screen freezes, a storm caught mid-strike. For the first time he asks for real-time field data from the Philippines. A technician hesitates, then connects a live feed compiled from public emergency channels and satellite imagery. The pause button feels suddenly childish. Reality does not stop. The feed shows chaos, but not the kind they expected. Filipino responders form human chains in floodwaters, passing children overhead. Makeshift command posts operate out of schools with half their roofs gone. Volunteers cook rice on gas burners in the rain, feeding evacuees without being told to. Coordination emerges not from rigid hierarchy but from familiarity, from shared language and shared loss. Mateo appears briefly on camera, soaked, blood on his forearm from a cut he has ignored. He is laughing as he shouts instructions, not because it is funny, but because panic would break the rhythm holding everyone together. The room of scientists watches in silence. The storm intensifies again. A second eyewall forms, something the model never predicted. The lead researcher feels something cold in his stomach. Years of certainty begin to crack. He realizes that his simulation assumed failure not because of data, but because of belief. He had coded human behavior as a weakness. On the screen, casualty projections climb. Then, unexpectedly, they slow. In some areas they drop. Someone whispers, "How?" No one answers. Mateo loses one of his team just before sunrise. A young man swept away by debris when a wall collapses. They search until their arms give out. They do not find him. There is no time to stop. Grief becomes something they carry in their bodies, heavy but silent. Lila presses her lips together until they bleed. Mateo looks at the gray horizon and keeps moving. Love does not always look gentle. Sometimes it looks like refusal. In the lab, the storm finally begins to weaken. The damage assessment renders itself line by line. It is catastrophic. It is also not as bad as the model's worst projections. The difference is measured in tens of thousands of lives. The room remains quiet long after the simulation ends. No one laughs. No one mocks. The lead researcher removes his glasses and rubs his eyes. For the first time, he understands that what shocked them was not the typhoon. It was the people who met it without permission, without perfect tools, and without giving up. When the sun finally breaks through the clouds in the Philippines, it reveals a landscape torn open and still breathing. Mateo sits on a concrete step, mud drying on his skin, watching evacuees share food. Children sleep against strangers' shoulders. Lila sits beside him, eyes hollow but alive. Somewhere, a radio plays a song too cheerful for the day. Mateo closes his eyes for just a moment. The storm is over. The work is not. The silence after the storm feels wrong, like the world has forgotten how to breathe. Water still drips from broken roofs, slow and steady, tapping into puddles that reflect a sky washed thin and pale. Mateo stands and stretches his back, every muscle stiff with pain that only now asks to be felt. Around him, the barangay looks flattened and rearranged, familiar shapes twisted into something barely recognizable. Houses lean against each other like wounded friends. Boats rest in the middle of roads. The smell of wet wood, salt, and spilled fuel mixes with something darker, something that always comes after storms but is never spoken aloud. Mateo scans faces, counting without numbers, measuring survival by movement. People are moving, the day can continue. Lila rises beside him and hands him a bottle of water. Her hands still shake, but her eyes are clear. She asks about the missing responder without asking, and Mateo answers without words. A small shake of the head is enough. Grief passes between them quietly, like an object set down and left untouched because there is no place to put it yet. Around them, volunteers reorganize instinctively. Someone sets up a whiteboard salvaged from a school, listing names of evacuees. Another group clears a path with bare hands so a truck can pass. No one gives a speech. No one waits for orders. This is the part outsiders never see, the long middle where heroism looks like repetition. Far away, the research facility feels colder than before. The simulation has ended, but its echo remains. Screens display damage reports pulled from international feeds, numbers updating slowly, reluctantly. The lead researcher watches footage of Filipino responders moving through wreckage with calm urgency. He notices details he once would have ignored. Hand signals replacing radios. Locals guiding responders through flooded alleys without being asked. Decisions made in seconds that his models would have required meetings to approve. A knot tightens in his chest. He realizes that his team did not just underestimate a response. They misunderstood resilience itself. A junior scientist breaks the silence, asking how the casualty rate is lower than predicted in several high-risk zones. The lead researcher does not answer immediately. He rewinds a clip showing Mateo lifting a child onto a rescue boat, passing her forward without hesitation, trusting hands he cannot see. Trust. The word feels strange in a room built on control. He admits quietly that their assumptions were flawed, that they coded community behavior as noise instead of structure. The admission hangs heavy, not dramatic, but real. No one argues. Back in the Philippines, the second day begins with heat. The sun presses down, drawing steam from the ground. Floodwaters recede just enough to reveal what they were hiding. Mateo leads a small team into an area that took the full force of the search. They move slowly, calling out names, listening for any sound that does not belong to insects or wind. They find survivors clinging to attics, dehydrated but alive. They also find those who did not make it. Each discovery tightens something inside Mateo, but his face remains steady. He has learned that breaking helps no one. Love here means staying functional. News crews arrive by afternoon, their cameras hungry. They film destruction, then turn toward responders, asking questions that feel too small for the answers required. Mateo gives short replies. He does not speak of bravery. He speaks of neighbors helping neighbors. Of training passed down, not taught in classrooms but learned through storms survived together. Lila stands just outside the frame, watching with a complicated expression. She knows the world will see this for a moment then move on. The storm will become footage. The work will remain. In the lab, an emergency meeting convenes. Not about blame but about revision. The lead researcher presents data showing how Filipino response patterns reduced fatalities despite infrastructure collapse. He points to decision-making speed, local knowledge, emotional bonds that strengthen coordination instead of weakening it. Some colleagues shift uncomfortably. This challenges years of published work. But the evidence refuses to bend. One by one they nod. Science, at its best, demands humility. A message arrives from an international agency requesting collaboration. They want to understand what happened on the ground, beyond numbers. The lead researcher hesitates only a moment before suggesting direct contact with Filipino disaster teams. Not intermediaries. Not reports. People. The idea would have seemed unnecessary before. Now it feels essential. Mateo hears about the request days later, relayed through official channels. He listens without reaction as an administrator explains that foreign scientists want interviews, observational access, maybe joint exercises in the future. Mateo thinks of the laughter he did not hear but somehow feels in his bones, the distant certainty that others held about his people's failure. He agrees anyway. Not for pride. For the next storm. Because storms always come back. That night, Mateo visits the family of the responder they lost. The house stands damaged but upright. Inside, the air is thick with quiet grief. He sits with them, answers questions, holds hands. There are no words that fix this. He offers stories instead. Small moments of courage, of jokes told in the rain, of a young man who chose to run toward danger because it felt like the right thing to do. The family listens, tears falling freely. This is another kind of response, one no simulation can measure. Weeks pass. Aid flows in uneven waves. Some areas recover quickly. Others lag, forgotten by headlines. Mateo's team rotates out, then back in. Fatigue settles deep, but so does something steadier. Purpose. Lila takes on more responsibility, her voice firm now when she gives instructions. She still remembers her father, but the memory no longer paralyzes her. It guides her. Across the sea, preparations begin for a joint workshop. The lead researcher reviews footage again, this time with respect bordering on awe. He drafts questions not about what went wrong but about what went right. He practices saying the word learn instead of teach. It does not come easily. When the Filipino delegation arrives months later, the weather is calm. Mateo steps into the research facility, feeling out of place in borrowed formal shoes. Lila walks beside him, head high. The scientists greet them politely, some awkwardly. The lead researcher meets Mateo's eyes and bows his head slightly, not as ceremony but as acknowledgement. In that moment, something unspoken shifts. The room no longer feels like a place of judgment. It feels like a place of listening. When the simulation runs again, updated with new variables, the outcome changes. Casualties drop. Response times shorten. The model breathes differently. The lead researcher watches the screen, then looks at Mateo and Lila. This time there is no smile. Only respect. The first joint exercise begins without ceremony, just a quiet agreement to start. The simulation room dims, and the digital sea comes alive again, But this time Mateo does not see it as an abstract threat. He sees the curve of a familiar coastline, the shape of bays where fishing boats hide, the low ground where water always finds a way in. As the storm parameters load, he feels a pressure behind his eyes, memory mixing with projection. The Chinese scientists watch closely as he leans forward, pointing out areas the model still treats as equal but are not. He explains how one narrow road becomes a choke point, how a school on slightly higher ground turns into a natural shelter, how fear spreads faster when people do not recognize the voice giving instructions. Lila speaks next, her words simple, almost gentle, describing how responders rotate tasks not to optimize time, but to keep each other human when exhaustion makes people careless. The room listens. No one checks a phone. No one interrupts. The storm on the screen intensifies, but something else happens too. The response flows earlier, smoother, guided by lived knowledge translated into numbers without losing its soul. As hours pass, the exercise turns into something deeper than training. It becomes confession. One scientist admits that he once believed emotion was a variable to suppress, not a force to direct. Another acknowledges that his own country's disaster plans failed when people froze waiting for permission that never came. Mateo listens, arms crossed, not defensive, just steady. He speaks about the first storm he ever worked, about the panic that nearly broke him, about the older responder who grabbed his shoulder and said, "Simply move your feet and your heart will follow." He explains that discipline exists in Filipino response too, but it is braided with care, with the understanding that no order works if the person receiving it feels alone. The scientists write faster now, but more importantly they look up. The mockery that once lived here feels distant, almost impossible to imagine, like a different lifetime. Outside the glass walls, the day remains calm, but inside, something is shifting that will outlast weather. News of the collaboration spreads slowly without spectacle. There are no viral headlines at first, just quiet adjustments and international guidelines, footnotes citing community-based response models drawn from Philippine experience. Mateo returns home before the ink dries, stepping back into humidity and noise that feel more real than any laboratory. He is welcomed not as a hero, but as someone who came back when expected. Rebuilding continues in fits and starts. Some houses rise again. Others remain empty, their owners gone or relocated. Mateo walks through the barangay, greeted by nods, by jokes about how he looks too serious now. Lila joins him, pointing out a new evacuation sign painted by children, bright and imperfect. Life pushes forward, uneven but stubborn. At night, Mateo still dreams of water climbing walls, but the dreams end differently now. He wakes knowing that what they learned has weight beyond memory. Months later, another storm forms. Smaller but unpredictable. This time, alerts move faster across borders. Models updated with lessons learned flag risks earlier. Local responders across several countries adjust plans based on shared insights. Mateo watches the rain begin again from under a shelter, radio humming with clear, calm voices. He feels the familiar tension but also something steadier beneath it. Trust, not just within his team but extending outward, invisible lines connecting people who may never meet but now understand each other a little better. The storm hits, causes damage, but fewer lives are lost. When the winds die down, reports circulate quietly through scientific channels. The improved outcomes are undeniable. Somewhere in a lab far away, a researcher pauses over the data and remembers the man who spoke about moving feet and following hearts. Years later, when Mateo finally steps back from frontline response, he stands on the same shoreline where he once tightened his vest before a storm that changed everything. The sea is calm, deceptively gentle. He knows better than to trust it completely, but he no longer feels small before it. He thinks of the responder they lost, of the family still carrying that absence, of Lila now training new volunteers with a voice that does not shake. He thinks of a room full of scientists who learned that strength does not always look like order, and that humility can save lives. The world remains fragile. Storms will keep coming. But somewhere between data and devotion, between simulation and sacrifice, something lasting has taken root. Mateo breathes in the salt air and turns back toward the village where work and life continue. The next storm does not announce itself with drama. It grows quietly, stitched together by warm currents and careless assumptions, far from cameras and conference rooms. Mateo senses it before the alerts arrive, the same way his knees sometimes ache before rain. He is no longer on the front line every day, but he still wakes early, still listens to the radio like it might speak directly to him. When the first advisory comes through, he feels the old pull in his chest, not panic, not excitement, but responsibility. He walks to the barangay hall where younger responders are already gathering, checking lists, testing radios, teasing each other with forced lightness. Lila stands at the center now, older, steadier, her hair tied back, her posture calm. She meets Mateo's eyes and nods once. No words are needed. This is how knowledge moves forward, not in speeches but in recognition. The storm strengthens faster than expected, but not faster than preparation. Evacuation begins early this time, not because of orders from above, but because people trust the voices giving them. Mothers pack bags without arguing. Fishermen secure boats and help neighbors instead of waiting. Children follow painted arrows toward shelters they recognize. Mateo watches from the side, heart heavy with memory and light with something close to pride. He remembers the first storm, the laughter in a distant room, the numbers that said people like this would fail. The wind rises, but the community does not fracture. It flexes. Across the ocean, in a lab that now feels less sterile than it once did, the updated simulation runs in parallel. The lead researcher stands behind a row of younger analysts, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the screen. The model incorporates variables once dismissed: trust latency, community signal strength, responder fatigue recovery. The storm intensifies digitally, but the projected losses remain lower than any comparable event in the past. The researcher does not smile. He exhales slowly, a release of something held too long. This is not triumph. It is correction. He thinks of Mateo's voice, calm and firm, describing choices made in seconds that saved hours later. He understands now that science does not lose credibility when it listens. It gains reach. Back in the Philippines, the typhoon makes landfall at night. Rain hammers roofs, wind screams through trees, but shelters hold. Generators kick on. Radios crackle with clear updates. Mateo moves between locations, not leading, not directing, just present. When a young responder freezes for a moment as debris slams nearby, Mateo steps close and speaks softly, telling him to breathe, to move his feet. The words travel like a bridge from past to present. The young man nods and continues. No one notices this moment except Mateo, and that is enough. The storm passes with damage, but without the scale of tragedy once expected. At dawn, people step out into wet streets, tired but alive. Children splash in puddles until scolded. Elders sit quietly, eyes closed, whispering thanks. Lila stands in the shelter doorway, clipboard tucked under her arm, scanning names, confirming counts. She smiles once when she realizes no one is missing. Mateo watches her and feels something loosen inside him. This is what survival looks like when lessons are allowed to live. In the days that follow, reports move through international channels. They are factual, restrained, impossible to ignore. Analysts note reduced casualties, faster recovery, stronger compliance with evacuation orders. Footnotes reference community-driven response frameworks adapted from Philippine experience. Somewhere, a policymaker circles a paragraph twice. Somewhere else, a training manual is rewritten. None of this makes headlines the way disaster once did, but it changes outcomes all the same. The lead researcher sends a brief message to Mateo through official lines. It contains no grand language. Just gratitude and an acknowledgement that what was once mocked became a standard others now learn from. Mateo reads it once, then puts the phone away. He does not need to reread it. Time moves forward as it always does. Years layer themselves gently over scars. Mateo eventually steps fully away from response work, his body finally demanding rest. On his last day, the team gathers without ceremony. Lila hands him a simple patch, worn smooth at the edges. He laughs softly, surprised by the tightness in his throat. He tells them to listen to each other, to trust the quiet signals as much as the loud alarms. He tells them storms will always test them, but they are never alone if they remember who they stand with. Then he leaves, walking back into the community he has helped hold together so many times. Sometimes, Mateo returns to the shoreline at dusk. The sea glows gold, innocent and dangerous all at once. He thinks of the responder they lost, of the storms that took more than they gave, of the ones that taught instead of destroyed. He thinks of a room full of scientists who learned that humility can travel faster than any wind. He knows the world will never be safe, never predictable. But he also knows this truth now lives in more places than before. When the wind rises again someday, fewer people will laugh. More people will listen. Mateo turns away from the water and walks home, carrying nothing but memory and the quiet certainty that it mattered.